the traditional colonial powers who benefited from the Industrial Revolution through our blood, our sweat, and our tears, have been the ones who have effectively put the world in this position of warming.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to this channel once again. Every time Mottley steps onto a stage, something interesting always happens. People who normally ignore political speeches suddenly start paying attention. Not because she is the leader of a superpower, not because she has the world's biggest economy behind her, but because she has a way of saying what millions of people are thinking and saying it directly to people in power. And in this speech, she does not hold back. And she delivers a message that has people across the Caribbean, Africa, and beyond paying very close attention. So let's watch this powerful speech until the end, and then I'll come back with my comments. Please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you.
Barbados, Jamaica, Grenada, and Dominica took action to ban South African goods in solidarity with the people of South Africa. Recognizing that though they were thousands of miles away, there was an injustice being perpetrated, man's inhumanity to man, that required people who had little power to take a stand and to say, wrong is wrong. And their efforts were soon followed. Months later, in April of 1960, in our sister island in Trinidad and Tobago, where the dock workers of Trinidad refused to take the cargo from South Africa off the ships in April of 1960, and refused to refuel the ship that had brought the cargo, recognizing that even though they were dock workers and not capable of great and grave decisions, they could do what they could within the space that they could. And their work was to be followed then, of course, by that titan of Caribbean revolution and social reform, Fidel Castro, El Comandante, who worked then with that other great Caribbean titan, Michael Manley of Jamaica, well known perhaps to many of you. And of course, our own father of independence, Errol Walton Barrow, who worked with Fidel Castro in the struggle for the liberation of the peoples of Southern Africa by allowing the planes that left Havana, Cuba, to refuel in Bridgetown, Barbados, in order to bring the troops into Southern Africa, and in particular, Southwestern Africa. And then, of course, there was the decision of the Commonwealth heads of government. And I remember as a young law student in London, caught up in the fervor of the anti-apartheid movement, and caught up in the passion of wanting to see your own imagery on television, because in those days you just didn't. And when we saw the students of South Africa week after week rise up to take their future into their own hands, it placed the pressure on leaders like Margaret Thatcher and others, such that by the time the Commonwealth heads of government meeting went to Nassau, Bahamas, a determination was made to establish the Eminent Persons Group. And in that Eminent Persons Group, co-chaired by Malcolm Fraser of Australia and Chief Obasanjo of Nigeria, it also included a woman who was to become the first Governor General of Barbados, Dame Nita Barrow, who came here as one of the 7 persons to determine whether there could be a platform for talks and for release in order to ensure that the ungodly and unconscionable actions of apartheid could be brought to an end. Regrettably, their work was to be stymied by the then government, but they were capable and able at the time to meet Madiba. And it is instructive what they wrote in their unanimous report about Madiba in 1986, and I quote, "Having visited him on 3 occasions, what was their assessment? That he impressed us as an outstandingly able and sincere person whose quality of leadership were self-evident. We found him unmarked by any trace of bitterness, despite his long imprisonment. His overriding concern was for the welfare of all races in South Africa in a just society. He longed to be allowed to contribute to the process of reconciliation." This was not post-release. This was not on the eve of release. This was still deep in the bowels of his imprisonment. And you know, I've deliberately decided to take a segue this afternoon before addressing the fundamental issues, because it is important that we contextualize the struggle and the values for those who refuse to be reminded, or who fail to be reminded, or who are not reminded, may well believe that this was as easy as dealing with the twinkle of an eye with the remediation and reparation of an awful thing. It hurt me to hear that there are some who believe that Madiba did not do enough, and perhaps worse, for a few, that he might have been a sellout. All because what they believe, justifiably so, should be theirs today is not yet theirs. I've deliberately started this conversation this evening by carrying you back to the 1950s and stopping in the 1980s and stopping again in the 1990s. Because if there is any one single truth, it is that each of us runs our leg of the relay. And the baton is all that can be required of us to carry. And yesterday I had the distinct honor of going to the Foundation's headquarters in the Center of Memory and of reading, and I feel so privileged to be given copies of the transcript in Madiba's own handwriting, and I shall treasure them as long as I have breath. But in reading his own assessment of where he was and what he believed had happened, in what was to become the beginning of chapter 1 of the presidential years, it was ironic that he started with the words, "Men and women all over the world, right down the centuries, come and go." Men and women all over the world, right down the centuries, come and go. What is more significant for me is that as he ended that first chapter, he also reflected on the fact that he sought at no stage for the fame that was to follow him. And that the notion that he could be regarded as a saint was one that he thoroughly rejected. In the last words, I never was one even on the basis of an earthly definition of a saint as a sinner who keeps trying. My friends, we need to pause sometimes and to remember context always. And I do so because in a very real sense, that which I've come to address you today on too is the subject of a great struggle, and will be the subject of a struggle that will require many different people to run their different legs of the baton, of the race, to hand over the baton. And the example of Madiba is the example more than any other that I would want us to hold on to, because in so doing, it is the values that he exhibited, the moral example, the moral compass that he provides, that gives us both the strength and the capacity to run this race, which will be the greatest race that humanity will require of any generation. It stands out for me that at the very outset, courage was never lacking. It is a cause for which I am prepared to fight, but a cause for which I am prepared to die. How many of us can say that today? It was the moral fortitude of a man that determined that no type of offer with special conditionalities for early freedom would be acceptable, because what was required was justice. It is amazing that in the face of the gravest and greatest inhumanity, not just to himself, to his family, to his people, that the vengeance that would otherwise eat and force others into action was absent from his mind, body, and spirit. And as I just read to you from the evidence of the Eminent Persons Group, not conveniently so as an act of politics, but as an act of character, deep in the bosom of his imprisonment. And then there's the story that was told to me yesterday by Cello, as we looked at the photographs of what his cell contained. And I well recall my own visit to Robben Island 20 years ago. And all who, like me, have practiced a little criminal law in my career know that that is a common sight in colonial constructed prisons that had no sanitary facilities. And the humility of the man captured best in being able to ensure that when one of his own brothers was unable to take care of themselves in the most basic and human of ways, that Madiba performed the duties of cleaning for him. An example of servant leadership, if ever there is one. So forgive me if I have strayed a bit, because I believe that in this world where everything is instantaneous and quick, and where people expect results like that, we sometimes need to remind ourselves of the context of the struggles that we fight. and to remind ourselves of what truly was at stake. There are some young people who would simply now, 3 decades after his release, will only know of Nelson Mandela in the context of a history book or in the stories told by others, but would not appreciate what it is to be prevented from being able to love who you want, to work where you want, to live where you want, to do what you want, in ways that are simply not capable of contemplation today. But we can't talk about economic justice and economic opportunity if the basic aspects of freedom have not been guaranteed. No one expects us to be stuck in a moment of time, but it is the understanding that he did what was his to do. It is now up to us to do what is ours to do. And it is for that reason I've come to KwaZulu-Natal. You know, we live in a world that is at a very strange moment in time. It's been described recently as a polycrisis. And it has been so described because as soon as you get accustomed to managing one crisis, you've been hit with another one and another one and another one. And that is what it has felt like in the last few years. This country already knows what it is to lose people to the ravages of a public health crisis as you did with HIV and AIDS for so long. Then to have to face, like the rest of us, the awful pandemic of COVID-19, taking away so many. All of us know people who have died in the last few years. None of us dreamt of a moment when our movement would be restricted such that we couldn't do the things that we wanted to do. And this was not being imposed on us by authoritarian governments. This was being imposed by public health specialists for the safety and survival of all of us. And as if that were not enough, because we were already fighting the climate crisis, we were still recovering from the financial crisis of 2008-9. As if all of that was not enough, then comes the awful scourge of the cancer of inflation, the cancer of the cost of living. And believe you me, it is a cancer, because you keep trying to run after it and run after it, but you can't catch up with it in that way. And we have now to come to understand that as much as we needed to mobilize to fight against vaccine inequity, that we were not a one-issue country or a one-issue people, that we literally had to fight these multiple crises, because as all of this is happening, people were still dying from the climate crisis. I don't talk about the climate change. Change happened a long time ago. Crisis is where we are, and crisis is what we have to fight. And today, I want us to recognize that what is required of us is going to have to allow us to, one, develop partnerships in places where we may never have dreamt of so doing before, and to be able to do things in new ways that we had never thought of doing. And that the actions required are not simply those of others, but of us. Because it is the collective action that has led the world to be where it is today. There is no doubt that those primarily responsible for the increase in greenhouse gas emissions are the G20 countries, for whom 80% of the responsibility is there. Within that context, the traditional colonial powers who benefited from the Industrial Revolution through our blood, our sweat, and our tears, have been the ones who have effectively put the world in this position of warming. Theirs is the stock of gases. But then there are those who continue today, for which there are many of us. No name, no blame, because it's all of us. And it is the combined effect of the stop primarily, but yes, the flow today that continues to cause the problems. I want us to reflect on the principles of justice and solidarity.
All the time, who sees us and who hears us? We continue to be confronted by problems of blacklisting, which pale into insignificance when compared to climate change, but which destroy our financial sector. The illicit flow of weapons, such that the ease with which people can go into public spaces and shoot and kill others is now regarded as just another item on the news because we promote profit in the manufacture and trade of guns and weapons, of non-communicable diseases that strike down our people in the most insidious of ways because we allow diets that promote the prosperity of a few multinational corporations to become the norm of the day with the food that we eat and the lives that we live. And in the case within our own community, Belize and Guyana continue to face challenges to their territorial integrity. I suppose people feel that because we have talked so long about Belize and Guyana and Cuba, that we can continue to talk about climate change and these other things, and that it is okay for it to be another tick on a UN General Assembly speech. These are all threats to our stability, to the people's stability in our lands. But you know, since last we met, there are other instances and circumstances, not of our making, that may yet destabilize us. And we say it over and over, but we ask who is listening. And you know, we don't come with tales of woe only. The Caribbean has produced excellence. It really has. Nobel laureates, sportsmen who have excelled and are the best in the world of their type, artists, the best in the world of their type, leaders who have inspired previous generations and current generations. We don't come here as a proud people asking for handouts. We don't want and will not be mendicant. What we want, no, what we need is fiscal and policy space. Fiscal and policy space to achieve sustainable development, to be nimble, to adapt, and to innovate in ways that allow us to be true and faithful to the task of bringing prosperity to our people, or as in the theme of this General Assembly, to eradicate poverty, to educate our people, to include all such that there's not some outside and some inside. We want an international order equally that recognizes that there must be different policy prescriptions to suit the circumstances that we all have. And we can still be friends, small and large, north and south, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, all different races, all genders. An equitable and just international order that is truly built on the principles of justice and fairness for all and not just for some. A United Nations that recognizes that as 74 years old we must be able to have difficult conversations as mature people and solve them. Many in the developing world were persuaded or required to abandon policies that were designed for the majority of our population to be transformed. And those policies were fashioned to adopt a consensus that was settled in Washington, D.C. and named thereafter. And that ultimately, regrettably, was about the consolidation of wealth in the hands of a very few. That's why we have seen the growing inequality that we have seen in the world over the last few decades. That is why too many people over the world have become cynical about governments and about the benefits that they can bring to them. The fueling of the greed of a few threatens to undermine what little gains we have made since independence. And we judge ourselves harshly because independence is a recent phenomenon for us. Others who have taken 150 years to get where they have gotten are still stumbling and falling. And you want to judge those who have had less than 50 or 60 years to operate in a world that has not been made in their image and that does not reflect their interests. This is the fate, my friends, of simply too many. And Mr. President, despite our small size, the 14 countries of the Caribbean community have been able to play leadership roles of international import. I can't stand here today without talking about St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that has become the smallest nation of the world ever to be elected to the Security Council to sit on it. We are proud of them. In addition, and I want to speak to this, because when CARICOM was confronted with the unfolding situation in Venezuela, I accompanied the then chairman of CARICOM, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, as well as the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, to meet in this building with the UN Secretary General in January of this year. And we met with many delegations, and some said we were wasting our time, and some said the time for talk was already over. And we said then, as we say almost 9 months later, the time for dialogue, the time for talk, my friends, can never be over in a world that wants peace and prosperity. We don't take sides, but what we know is that you cannot propel war over dialogue. The people of Venezuela must be allowed to decide their own future in accordance with the principles of the United Nations Charter. Principles of non-intervention, non-interference, prohibition of the threat or use of force, respect for the rule of law, human rights, and democracy. It is regrettable that other multilateral organizations have not followed their own charters. And that is what makes the actions of our Secretary General of the UN more laudable, for refusing to breach his own charter and take actions even though member states have hurled into the recognition of those unelected. Our Caribbean Sea must remain a zone of peace, and for that we shall fight. Mr. President, I speak plainly and without fear, because from independence, Barbados' foreign policy has been premised on the simple principle of friends of all, satellites of none.
So what struck me immediately was not the discussion about Barbados. It was the discussion about Mandela. Because when most people hear the name Nelson Mandela, they think about prison. They think about injustice. But Mottley focuses on something different. She focuses on what happened after. Think about it. After everything Mandela went through, he had every reason to be bitter, every reason to seek revenge, every reason to divide. Instead, he chose reconciliation. And honestly, that's one of the hardest things a leader can do. Anybody can lead when emotions are high. Anybody can point fingers. Anybody can create enemies. The real test is whether you can build something better after the damage is already done. And that's a lesson that applies far beyond South Africa. Now, let's talk about this idea of polycrisis, because I think a lot of people hear terms like that and immediately tune out. But when you break it down, it's actually very simple. Imagine trying to solve one major problem while three others are hitting you at the same time. The cost of living is rising, food prices are rising, climate disasters are becoming more frequent, healthcare systems are under pressure, economic growth is slowing down. For many countries, especially the smaller ones, that's the reality. And that's why leaders from Caribbean often sound more urgent when discussing those issues. They are not speaking from theory, they are speaking from experience. A hurricane does not care how big your economy is. A global recession does not ask whether your country is ready. Small nations usually feel global shocks first and recover last. And that's what I think Mottley is trying to highlight. Now, here is where the speech becomes really interesting. She argues that countries like Barbados are not asking for charity. They are asking for room to compete. And there is a difference, a huge difference, because nobody wants to spend their life depending on handouts. People want opportunity. Countries, they also want opportunity, the chance to innovate, the chance to grow, the chance to solve problems without constantly running into barriers they did not create. Whether you agree with her or not, it's a powerful argument. Now, one of my favorite parts of this speech was this phrase that friends of all, satellites of none. That might be one of the smartest foreign policy statements I've heard in a very long time, because the world is becoming increasingly divided. Every country is being pressured to pick a side. Support this bloc, support that bloc, align with this power, reject that power. But her argument is that small nations should be able to cooperate with everyone while maintaining their independence. And honestly, that's easier said than done, especially when larger powers have competing interests. But I think it's a philosophy that many Caribbean countries can relate to. Now, here's what I think separates Mottley from many politicians. She does not speak like someone trying to win the next news cycle. She speaks like someone trying to shape a conversation. That's a big difference. Most political speeches focus on the next election, and the speeches that people usually remember focus on next generation. And that's why leaders like Mandela are still discussed decades later. They spoke beyond the moment. Now, whether you agree with every solution Mottley proposes is besides the point. The reason people listen is because she's forcing a conversation many leaders try to avoid. Who benefits from the current system? Who gets left behind? And what happens when smaller nations decide they are no longer satisfied with the status quo? Those are very difficult questions to ask, but they are very important questions. And the leaders who ask difficult questions are usually the ones that history remembers. This was not just a speech about Barbados. It was a speech about leadership. The kind that thinks long term, the kind that challenges powerful interests, and the kind that refuses to accept that small nations should have small voices. So guys, thank you so much for watching until the end. If you are coming across this channel for the first time, please subscribe. Also, please give this video a thumbs up and share. I'll see you guys in the next reaction.